The night I agreed to be his plus one, I was elbow-deep in a crate of 19th century Haudenosaunee beadwork and running on my third coffee of the shift. I work in the collection storage facility at the Royal Ontario Museum. The part tourists never see. No chandeliers, no ambient lighting, no velvet ropes, just rows of acid-free boxes, humidity monitors, and the particular silence that comes from being surrounded by things older than the country itself. I'd been there 6 years. I knew the smell of cedar and conservation-grade tissue paper better than I knew the smell of my own apartment. That was fine with me. I'm not the kind of person who needs a lot of noise to feel alive. So when the door opened that Tuesday evening at 9:15, after the public had gone home, after most of my colleagues had gone home, I assumed it was the security guard doing his rounds. I didn't look up. I just kept working, turning a pair of moccasins over in my gloved hands, checking the stitching along the toe. "You're the conservator?" The voice was low, not loud, not aggressive, just certain, the kind of voice that assumes it will be heard. I looked up. He was standing in the doorway in a dark overcoat, and he was not the security guard. He was maybe 35, broad-shouldered, with a jaw that looked like it had been arguing with something for most of his life. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that someone had taped closed with a butterfly bandage. Recently, badly, probably himself. "The museum is closed," I said. "I know." He stepped inside anyway. "I need to speak with you." I set the moccasins down. "How did you get in here?" He didn't answer that. He looked around the room the way men like him look at rooms. Cataloging exits, I realized later. At the time, I just thought he was rude. "Your name is Fiona Walsh?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Adrian Volkov." He paused, as if that was supposed to mean something. When I didn't react, something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. Not annoyance. More like reassessment. "I need a favor." I pulled off one glove, then the other. I was not going to have this conversation in nitrile. "Mr. Volkov, it's 9:15 on a Tuesday. Whatever you're selling, I'm not selling anything." He reached into his coat. I flinched, I won't pretend I didn't, and pulled out an envelope. He set it on the table between us. "I need someone to accompany me to a charity gala at the Fairmont this Friday. Black tie. The Canadian Opera Company's annual fundraiser." I stared at the envelope. "You came into a restricted facility after hours to ask me to go to a party with you?" "It's not a party, it's a business obligation." He said it the way someone says it's not personal, right before they do something very personal. And I need someone who isn't connected to my world, someone credible, someone who won't ask too many questions or expect too many explanations. "You need a stranger. I need someone specific." He nodded toward the envelope. "That's for your time. Dress included." I didn't touch the envelope. "Why me?" He held my gaze for a moment. "Because you pulled a 17th century Wendit wampum belt out of a flooded storage unit in 2019, and the insurance assessors said it was a total loss and you said no. You spent 4 months restoring it." He paused. "You don't panic, you don't flinch, and you don't talk to people you shouldn't." I didn't ask how he knew about the wampum belt. I should have. Instead, I said, one night, and you tell me nothing that I don't need to know." Something that might have been relief moved through his expression and was gone. Agreed. That was my first mistake, believing that I could stand next to a man like Adrian Volkov for one evening, and walk away knowing nothing. I called my sister the next morning. Her name is Bridget, and she is the opposite of me in almost every measurable way. She works in marketing, she owns 4 different shades of the same lipstick, and she has opinions about gala attire that she delivers with the conviction of a TED Talk. "You're going to the opera ball," she said flatly, "with a man who showed up at your job after dark and didn't explain how he got in. When you say it like that, Fiona." I checked him out. I had. Adrian Volkov was listed as the managing director of a private equity firm called Volkov Capital, incorporated in Toronto, offices on Bay Street. He was in the news occasionally. A donation here, a board seat there. Nothing alarming. Nothing that explained the butterfly bandage or the certainty in his eyes. "He put money in an envelope," Bridget said, "for my time." "It's not." "How much?" I told her. There was a long pause. "I'll come help you get ready," she said. The dress he'd arranged was waiting at a boutique on Bloor Street. Dark green, long, with a neckline that felt more comfortable than I expected. My sister zipped me in and made me turn around 3 times before she was satisfied. She fixed my hair with a seriousness she usually reserved for her biggest client pitches. "You look like someone who belongs in a room full of people who belong in rooms," she said. Then, more quietly, "Be careful, okay?" I told her I would be. I meant it at the time. The car that arrived was a black SUV. The driver greeted me by name and said nothing else the entire way. Adrian was waiting in the lobby of the Fairmont, and when he turned and saw me, he went still for just a second. Then he walked toward me and offered his arm and said, "Thank you for coming." "You're welcome," I said. "You still have a bandage above your eye." He touched it briefly. "Old habit." He didn't explain. The gala was exactly what I'd expected. 200 people in expensive clothes standing in a gilded ballroom raising money for an institution they loved to be seen loving. The food was good. The wine was better. Adrian moved through the room the way water moves around rocks, smooth and inevitable. And I stayed beside him and smiled at the people he introduced me to, and answered questions about the museum with the kind of enthusiasm that is technically honest but strategically vague. I was doing well. I thought we were going to get through the evening cleanly. Then I noticed the woman. She was standing near the bar, in navy blue, and she wasn't watching Adrian. She was watching me. When I looked directly at her, she didn't look away. She just lifted her glass in the smallest possible acknowledgement and turned to speak to the man beside her. I leaned close to Adrian. The woman at the bar, dark blue dress. "Do you know her?" He didn't look. He said very calmly, "Yes. Should I be concerned?" "Not yet." He steered me smoothly toward the other side of the room. "She's here to see who I brought. Now she knows. We have about 40 minutes before she makes a phone call." "A phone call to who?" "To the people who would like to know that I no longer have anyone beside me that I trust." He glanced at me sideways. "Except that now they'll think I do. I processed this. So I'm not just a +1. I'm a signal." "You're a very convincing one. What happens in 40 minutes? Ideally nothing. I'll have a conversation I need to have, and then I'll take you home, and this will be over." The word "ideally" was doing a tremendous amount of work in that sentence, and we both knew it. He had the conversation. I stood beside a display of silent auction items, a ski weekend in Whistler, tickets to the Calgary Stampede, a private sailing charter out of Halifax. And I smiled at strangers and answered a question about beadwork conservation from a genuinely curious woman who turned out to be a materials science professor at U of T. It was the best 12 minutes of the evening. Adrian returned. He seemed calmer than before, which I didn't entirely trust. "Ready to go?" "Extremely." We collected our coats and made for the side exit he'd clearly already identified. The night air off Bloor Street was cold and clear, that specific Toronto cold that feels like the city is finally exhaling after a long day. We were almost at the car when a man stepped out from beside a concrete pillar. He was younger than I expected. Mid-20s, probably, with the look of someone who had been waiting a while and was no longer patient about it. He wasn't holding anything. He didn't need to be. "She's not going to help you," he said to Adrian. He was looking at me when he said it. "She has no idea what she's standing next to." Adrian stepped in front of me, not dramatically, just calmly, deliberately, the way you'd close a door. "She doesn't need to," he said. "The board has already decided, Adrian. You bring a museum curator to the opera ball, and you think that changes the vote?" "I think it changes the conversation," Adrian said. "Tell your father that." The younger man, and I understood now, from the shape of his jaw and the particular quality of his contempt, that this was someone who had grown up with Adrian and learned to resent him for it. Stared for a long moment. Then he stepped back. "Friday," he said. It sounded like a deadline. He left. The driver opened the car door. Adrian waited until I'd gotten in before he got in himself. We drove for a few blocks in silence. "His name is Connor Ashford," Adrian said finally. "His father is on the board of my company. Has been for 11 years. The board that's deciding something. Whether I remain managing director." He looked out the window. The CN Tower was lit up above the skyline, red and white. His father was my mentor. He brought me into the firm when I was 26 and had nothing. I thought that counted for something. And now? Now he's been selling information about our client portfolio to a competitor. Has been for about 8 months. He said it the way you say something you've been carrying a long time. If I go to the board with evidence, he'll say I fabricated it. If I do nothing, he'll drain what's left and walk. What he didn't expect was for me to find a witness. I turned to look at him. What witness? He looked back at me. The professor you spoke to at the silent auction. Dr. Keiko Yamamoto. She's the independent auditor the competitor hired to verify the portfolio data they were receiving. He paused. She didn't know it was stolen. She thought it was a consulting engagement. I thought about the 12 minutes I'd spent talking about conservation techniques with a woman who laughed at my joke about humidity gauges. You arranged for me to talk to her. I hoped you would. You're easy to talk to. You used me as... I put you in a room where she might feel comfortable enough to speak frankly. His voice was even. I didn't tell you to say anything specific. I didn't tell you what to ask. You just talked to her. And now she's a witness. She already agreed to provide a statement. She called her solicitor from the coat check. He turned back to the window. She's a careful person. She wanted documentation that she'd cooperated voluntarily, she said. A pause. She said the conservator she'd been speaking to seemed like someone who understood what it meant to preserve things correctly. I sat with that for a moment. You could have told me what was actually happening, I said. Would you have come? An honest question. I thought about the envelope on the table, the butterfly bandage, the certainty in his voice when he said, "You don't panic." Probably not, I admitted. I know. He didn't sound triumphant about it. Just tired. I'm sorry. You deserved more than I gave you. What happened over the next 4 days was not my area of expertise, but I'll tell you what I understood of it. The statement from Dr. Yamamoto, combined with the internal financial records Adrian had spent 3 months quietly collecting. Working, I later learned, almost entirely alone, because the only 2 people in the firm he'd trusted had each turned out to be in the Ashford orbit in different ways, was enough. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a 12-page document that went to the board on Monday morning and resulted in an emergency meeting by Monday afternoon. Gerald Ashford resigned before he could be formally removed. His son Connor left the country, which I think tells you most of what you need to know about how guilty he knew himself to be. 2 junior analysts were terminated. The firm's legal team spent the rest of the week on calls. I found out about most of this through Bridget, who somehow knew before I did. Because Bridget exists on a different information network than the rest of us, and I've stopped trying to understand it. Adrian called on Tuesday evening. I owe you an explanation, he said. You owe me a proper dinner, I said. The canapes at the Fairmont were not sufficient. A beat of silence. Then something in his voice that I hadn't heard before. Lighter, looser, like something had been set down. Canoe? Friday? 7 o'clock? Canoe is on the 54th floor of the TD Tower. On a clear night, you can see the lake from every table. I've walked past it 100 times and never been inside. Friday, I said. And this time, you're going to tell me everything. Everything, he agreed. He did. We were there until they were stacking chairs around us, and the server, who was either very patient or very well tipped, kept the wine coming without being asked. Adrian talked about arriving in Toronto from Kyiv, at 17 with his uncle and $80, and no English. About learning the language by reading financial news because it was the only English language section of the library that didn't have a wait list. About Gerald Ashford offering him a job after Adrian correctly identified a valuation error in a fund prospectus at a conference where Adrian had no business being. About 11 years of believing that loyalty was its own kind of currency. And the specific, quiet devastation of learning that it isn't always. I talked about the wampum belt. About my mother, who was Métis, and who had died when I was 19, and who had given me a particular feeling about the importance of preserving things that couldn't be replaced. About choosing the ROMS Conservation Lab, because it was one of the few places I'd found where that feeling made sense as a career. At some point, the conversation stopped being an explanation and became something else. The kind of talking that happens when 2 people stop performing and start actually seeing each other. We split the bill. He walked me to the subway because I said I preferred it, and he didn't argue. At the King Street entrance, he stopped. I need to ask you something, he said. Okay, the night at the museum. When I said I needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. He looked at me steadily. You've been asking questions ever since. You know that, right? I thought about that. I asked them to myself, I said. I'm just selective about which ones I say out loud. He almost smiled. It was the closest I'd seen him get. Is that a professional habit or a personal one? Both, I said. Occupational hazard of working with things that can't speak for themselves. You have to read them very carefully before you touch them. He was quiet for a moment. What are you reading now? He asked. The street was loud around us. A streetcar ground past on King, and someone nearby was laughing about something, and the cold was the kind that makes the whole city smell like concrete and winter and something just beginning. A first edition, I said. In very good condition. Rare provenance. Probably undervalued for a long time. I looked up at him. I haven't decided if I want to be the one to restore it. It's a significant commitment. Restoration takes time, he agreed. It does. But the alternative is deterioration, he said quietly. Things don't stay stable on their own. I took a breath of cold Toronto air. No, I said. They don't. I went down the stairs to catch my train. I didn't look back, but I heard him standing there until I turned the corner. He texted me that night. It said only, "Thank you. For all of it." I looked at my phone for a long time. Then I typed back, "Don't lose the butterfly bandage. I want to hear that story properly." 3 dots appeared. Then, "That's going to require at least dinner." I smiled at my phone in my empty apartment, in the particular silence I'd always told myself was enough. Maybe it still was. Maybe it was just a little larger now.